Hey, Bill, as we get people joining on, I want to mention that the data breach investigation report, Verizon actually puts out a data breach investigation report, DBIR, every year. And it came out just 2 days ago. Did you see that?
I had not seen that, no.
So, and thanks, Megan. Megan just dropped the link in the chat. So for everybody who's we're just kind of killing a few minutes before we get started. But if you haven't looked at it before, if you've never even heard of it, go to that link. They have an executive summary, which is just a couple pages and gives you a high-level overview. What the report does is Verizon has a very large data investigation, data response forensics team, and so they handle a lot of breaches themselves, and then a lot of other entities report information on data breaches to them. And so this is one of the only industry reports that is analyzing data from actual breaches, and then it's about over 3,000 every year, and they analyze those and give trends, year-over-year trends. They've been doing it for over a decade now, and it's probably the most quoted report in the security industry. So reading that executive summary, and then they also have industry breakouts. And so you guys, I'm almost certain they have a healthcare industry breakout, so you could read that summary, and it would be very helpful just to get an overview. And if you start looking at it, it happens in May every year. So you can look at year over year, where's the threat landscape moving for overall and for your specific industry. And thanks again, Megan, for dropping that link in the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone who could join today. We do have all participants muted, but we encourage you to submit any questions or comments through the chat function of the WebEx. At this time, we're really excited to get started with the Forward Movement Initiative webinar around cybersecurity during COVID-19. We have both Bill Lopez, co-founder and COO of Strategic Solutions, and Jeremy with Huntress Labs, who has been a dedicated and reliable partner in the security industry. We're excited for the information we have to share with you. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jeremy to get us started.
Yeah, cool. And Bill, before we do you just want to say a couple words about the Forward Movement Initiative before I dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. So Forward Movement Initiative is something we've created at Strategic to address the challenges that healthcare organizations are facing through this this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, it's imperative that that healthcare facilities get timely information, as it's always changing, to make the appropriate decisions for their practice. So today's initiative and focus is going to be around being cyber ready, but it's more than that now. It's being cyber ready for COVID-19. The threatscape has changed immensely, and we'll talk a lot about that, Jeremy. I know you will. And yeah, we also have some participants on this call that are not in healthcare, that are in other industries, but this data is just as important to them as it is to anyone in healthcare. So with no further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Jeremy, and everyone just on the call. I want everyone to know that Jeremy is no stranger to healthcare. His wife is actually chief of internal medicine at a large clinic in Texas, in Houston, Texas. So he hears quite a bit about the challenges that providers are facing on a daily basis. So he'll be able to speak in terms that will probably ring familiar with everyone on this call. So Jeremy, with no further ado, take it away.
And yes, and I ran this content by the chief, and she approved it. So if she's got it, we should be good to go. But thank you very much for that intro, and everybody stay tuned to the end to learn more about the Move Forward initiative and the free offers that Strategic is putting together for you guys. So a little bit about us. I'm a security specialist at Huntress. Why you want to listen to Huntress? Well, our founders came from the NSA as cyber offensive warfare operators. So they know what they're talking about, and we all kind of feed off of that. We've all been working in the industry for a long time, but we're a cybersecurity company that Strategic partners with to stop incidents before they become a breach. And Strategic has invited me here today to give you guys an update on the threat landscape and talk about commonly overlooked issues, like, for one, persistence. But let's start with a simple fact. The vast majority of small businesses outsource their IT. Whether it's to the IT guy down the street or a professional IT service provider like Strategic, SMBs have been doing this for a long time. So let's hop in the Wayback Machine and take a look at 2005. Turns out 2005 was an important year in IT. This is the first year that Microsoft shipped Windows and antivirus and firewall all together in one. If you don't know what that means, it's okay. It's just the first time that Microsoft baked into their operating system what were previously third-party security solutions. Kind of like how car makers build in the cameras and sensors today that used to be aftermarket add-ons. And it is Thursday after all, so let's do some throwbacks just for fun. Look some other things in technology that were popular in 2005. I don't know about you guys, but I actually miss my candy bar phone from Nokia back when everybody had the universal charger and you couldn't break the thing. Motorola Razr, I think, was the top phone that year. You could get one share of Amazon for 39 bucks. Or you could get 100 shares for the same cost as a 30-inch LCD TV. YouTube was founded that year. Facebook was only a year old and only available to college and university students. So it's clear that the world of technology has changed overwhelmingly since then. I mean, look at how we're interacting right now, for example. But for most of us in small businesses and small practices, over the last 15 years and even up until now, IT security primarily meant firewalls and antivirus. Starting around 2017, this changed even at our level, whether we realized it or not. SMBs weren't on the target map at all before 2017, really, for most attackers, but their eye turned upon us and they discovered that small businesses are totally wide open for exploit. It was like the digital Alaskan gold rush, word spread, and now we continue to see that small businesses are a primary target of attackers. Why this new focus? What happened? Well, in a word, ransomware. Attackers have built entire economies around this on the dark web, and it's big business, estimated to be over $11.9 billion in 2019 alone. Overall, attacks and payouts are ever increasing. You don't just get ransomware, though. There are usually many precursors to threats like this, different stages of the attack process, and those have also evolved over time. And I totally understand that there are plenty of threats out there, not just ransomware. This is just a good one example to highlight because it's of widespread notoriety and news coverage. But let's take a look at an example attacker journey. So first, I as an attacker have to somehow gain initial access. This is very often through getting a user to click on something that maybe they shouldn't have in an email. But there are thousands of ways someone could get initial access to a system. This stage usually gets a lot of emphasis in the media, even though ultimately it can be argued that it doesn't matter that much. We should be able to spot these things after they happen and get rid of them before they become a problem. Step two, after I get into a system, I have to maintain persistence in that system, meaning I have to put something in place that even if you restarted your computer or you change your credentials, I still have access. And this is arguably the most important point because this is where they abuse trusted parts of the operating system to silently retain control over that device. Once this is done, the rest is really just a matter of time. This is actually the layer that Huntress focuses on to stop this whole process in its tracks. After they're comfortably in control and in the background, they usually just dwell on the systems for a while, sometimes for weeks, months. There's instances where it's even dwelling in systems for years. The average is over 100 days, and that comes from the data breach investigation report that I mentioned earlier. Remember this Equifax breach, huge in the news a couple of years ago? Forensics later uncovered that they were in the systems for over 140 days before the theft had been discovered. Huntress actually helps discover these persistent attacks in minutes and hours, not weeks and months. Attackers then use all of that time to develop the perfect exploit from all the information they've gathered on your organization, which eventually leads to the second part that we hear in the media, the payload drop. This is where files get stolen and sold on the dark web or encrypted and held for ransom or other nefarious objectives. But for most of us, 15 years later, all of this has changed, but IT security still means for us firewalls and AV because that's what we know. That's what we think we need. That's what we think we're willing to pay for. What we're really doing is sending our IT partners into a gunfight, not even armed with a knife, but with a magic wand. Good security comes in layers, not through magic. So let's talk about why security software alone isn't enough to keep us safe from today's threats. AV by itself, oh my gosh, Bill, this is embarrassing. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to restart my computer. Can you give me a minute? Just kidding. Anybody ever seen a screen like this before? This is the fabled blue screen of death. It's been terrorizing Windows users since day one. This screen happens when something fails. It commonly happens after an update, after you install new software, just like when you get into your car and turn on the ignition key and a series of processes begin that culminates in the running engine. When you turn on your computer, there are hundreds of auto-starting processes and components of Windows that come alive in a sequence to culminate in your PC booting up and running. If any one of those is missing or corrupted, you might see that blue screen of death. Now, imagine your amazing IT team installs the latest and greatest security software and they get the blue screen of death. What do you think they're going to do in that scenario? They're going to uninstall that software immediately and probably never use it again. So the makers of security software have to ignore Windows components for fear of breaking Windows. App developers know this. Unfortunately, so do attackers. Hackers are amazing at using valid sites and programs against us. This is known as social engineering, phishing, application abuse, things like that. So let's take a look at some recent examples related to the global pandemic. March 20th, we saw a notice from the Department of Justice and Attorney General William Barr asking all of us to report all incidences of fraud, including cyber attacks. Specifically, phishing is on the rise. By now, you guys all had a flood of emails still incoming, encouraging users to click on a link to get more info about COVID-19, which is something that we've all seen in the healthcare space. It happens even more. They specifically warned that some phishing emails are posing as the WHO or CDC, preying on the uncertainty and stress created by the pandemic. 2 days later, you notice the date here, Sunday, March 22nd, we saw this very sophisticated attack on hhs.gov. This was a phishing email providing COVID information, and it had a link directing users to HHS. Even if you were super diligent and you hovered over that link and you're like, Bill, I did the right thing. I hovered over. What did I see? hhs.gov. It looks like a valid URL because the attackers had also taken advantage of a vulnerability in the hhs.gov website that allowed them to create an open redirect. That's that information in red there that allows them to have the correct URL in the name, but then also redirect it to somewhere nefarious that steals credit card information, steals credentials, browser data, etc. This actually took down the hhs.gov website for quite a while. Another example, we are long past the days of an easy to spot phish. This is an example from March 4th, super early in the US pandemic. Very professional reproduction of CDC resources that led to credential stealing if you follow the links. They are totally opportunistic, right? Attackers are also targeting the media focus around a shortage of PPE. Scammers get your phone number from any number of ways, then sends out a text to offer free PPE posing as the Red Cross. If you follow that link, you're asked to put in your credit card information just for a delivery fee. While the stolen credentials or the stolen credit cards are real, the PPE is not. And it's not just spray and pray attacks either of just kind of throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. Here we see an example of an attacker sending an internal email from an account that has been taken over by an attacker. This is coming from a trusted source and it says, hey, please open this attachment to view our COVID office plan. The attachment requests and then steals Office 365 credentials. If this came from your HR business partner, you wouldn't think twice about it, and neither would I. So let's quickly take a look at this video that walks us through what one of these actually looks like in real life. So this is another FBI warning of the COVID-19 themed scams and phishing emails. And this was, again, March 20th. 1 day later, we get some research about, hey, this is happening in the wild. And they document that this one is actually an email just like what we were just looking at, reporting to be the Public Health District of Champaign. It comes with a VBS attachment that VBS is kind of like a PDF, right? It's a Microsoft version. And then when you open it up, automatically installs an executable file, which happens to be ransomware, in a temporary directory. We've highlighted it and put it on the desktop just for visibility. But when you run this, it's actually an obfuscated ransomware payload. This exe pops up in a temp directory that you never see, and it automatically runs the encryptor. Bye-bye files. Now, luckily, they're nice enough to leave us a note and say, you know what, it's not personal. This is all just business. So this is more of the spray and pray variety, right? Just seeing what I can get from sending a phishing email. But there's a lot of real life examples. And Bill, I think you want to share, take us through a real life example that your team has experienced?
Yeah, sure. We had a multi-specialty practice in North Carolina that our AV solution started detecting some abnormalities, but nothing really consistent. Shortly thereafter, we found out that their EHR was encrypted by a ransomware called Ryuk. Ryuk is unique in the sense that they tend to target larger businesses on the SMB spectrum, primarily going after revenue. Their ransom is, their ransom average is six figures, typically anywhere from $400,000 to $800,000. So, our team engaged. We had our incident response team actually go down to the client site in North Carolina, spent the weekend working with resources at Huntress Labs to begin the containment process. Fortunately, we had that relationship with Huntress, and here's why. Many of this type of infection, the AV detected abnormalities, but it didn't really detect what was going on. And our tools, traditional tools, were ineffective because this form of ransomware was cloaked behind a lot of the normal Windows functions you saw Jeremy display earlier. Huntress has the ability to go under the hood, for lack of a better term, to find those abnormalities, contain them, and remediate them. So the process went very well over the weekend, deploying the tool, working on containing machines, working on remediating machines. By Monday morning, the practice was back online, and our customer was ecstatic. They were ecstatic primarily because there was no data loss and there was minimal downtime. There was an inconvenience on Friday, and over the weekend, physicians had spotty access to access the system remotely. But fortunately, they had cyber liability insurance, and they were able to get all of this covered. So at the end of the day, it was about having really, really good backups, which they did, and having the appropriate tool to remove this version of ransomware.
And Bill, let me tell you, on our side of things, we see a ton of these attacks, right? And Ryuk is just one of many ransomwares, and you are correct. They are one of the ones that they're particularly nasty, and they make pretty large demand. So we always hate to see that. This is a success story. Everyone is susceptible to security incidents like this. Huntress, no exception. Every single business on the planet could have this happen to them. They're like security incidents are like natural disasters. And so just as you were lucky to be able to utilize Huntress in that scenario, that multi-specialty practice was lucky enough to partner with you, who had all the tools of the trade available and already had, in a proactive way, set them up with the ability to succeed. Because this is not a shameful moment of, oh, this thing got past our preventative tools. No preventative tools are going to have perfect prevention. Period, end of discussion. But when you have all of these layers set up, including backups that are tested frequently so that you know they work, you can keep an incident from becoming a nasty breach. And you can treat it not as, oh, we had an incident, that's a terrible thing. You can look at it as, oh, we had an incident, how did we recover from it? Oh, that's great. It took it over the weekend. Cool, let's keep moving on. We know we have a great IT partner to help us with things like this. So more power to you. Applaud. My applause to you and the team, and I know isn't helping you through this as well on our side of things, and your team was really, really on top of it and very impressed. So great job all around.
Absolutely. Real quick, I was going to mention that this couldn't have happened at a worse time for that client. It was right at the peak of COVID when everyone was still trying to figure out what was going on, how long practices were going to be down. We had an entire staff down there, our incident response staff in PPE gear, and they were going between like 8 locations. So it was a big deal. The practice could have been down theoretically without these types of tools at our disposal. They could have been down a week or more, and being down a week or more during a pandemic like this would have been catastrophic for them. So again,
And at the risk of
fortunate.
sounding hyperbolic, even though I know I'm not, because I have the experience and I've seen these things, these can be business-ending events. I've seen our IT partners close their doors. I've seen customers close their doors after events like this take place. So if you aren't prepared and you don't have that incident response plan in place, or the partner with the plan, they can really be business near-death experiences, or just shut the doors can be the only option. So with the right plan in place, it can be a big deal, but not a data loss event, which is at the end of the day what we're all concerned about. So really great job. Now, just like we were talking about, and Bill mentioned there, they use these same tactics with components of Windows to hide in plain sight, to establish that persistent foothold. Now, I'm not expecting you to know what any of this stuff is, but this is actually an example of what fileless malware looks like on the back end. Attackers use 7 valid components of Windows to perform a malicious action that results in persistent access to Windows. Nothing in the preventative stack is going to find something like this, but it's obviously shady when you have security engineers looking at this stuff. Strategic Solutions partners with us to provide this granular level of security, but they need your help. Security is a team sport, and they need you on their side to have a fighting chance. Because at the end of the day, preventative security is absolutely necessary, but all tools have their limitations because of what they're designed to look for. It's software. Even those with AI, while really freaking cool, are still software. The end result is that if you make a smaller and smaller net, an attacker will make a smaller fish to get through the holes. We hunt the fish to get through the net, and our threat ops engineers are researching data on your computers that other tools simply aren't. Sometimes the best tool of preventative medicine is early detection, right? Catching a disease at stage 1 is entirely different than at stage 4. Many IT service providers don't focus on security like they should. However, Strategic Solutions cares enough about your security to mandate Huntress as one of the tools in their standard offering to protect your systems. So Bill, can you take over screen share and give us more information about the Move Forward initiative and how audience members can participate?
Let's see. Yeah, so what we're going to, real quick, just to take that a step further, I've got 3 slides. We're going to go over, kind of wrap this up for everyone. So you've heard a lot today from Jeremy around, how we leverage Huntress, about the threatscape, what's happening. I'm going to talk a little bit about why there's such an increase in threat right now, just because of COVID. Talk a little bit about technologies that you should consider having in your mix, and beyond technology, what else can you do as a healthcare organization to reduce the potential risk of exposure? So why is cyber threat up, right? Why is it up? I mean, we're seeing percentages as high as 350%, and this is coming from our partnership with a company called InfraGard that allows us to interface weekly with the FBI. So we're getting these numbers straight from the government, and so they're real. So why is there such an increase in the activity? So these are the 4 main reasons. One is there's an influx of cyber criminals happening, and what that means is globally, IT professionals have been furloughed, or as a result of downsizing, the economic downturn, and some of these people actually have considered the life of cybercrime to make ends meet. It sounds crazy, but when you look at this pandemic and the impact it's had to our planet, this is what's happening. Where there are people that were gainfully employed that were let go, that felt in order to maintain their sense of livelihood they had to do this. There is also the potential that if you've been offboarded, if you've been furloughed, if you didn't have a proper offboarding policy, and for example, you didn't disable remote access credentials, you didn't disable Active Directory accounts, you left their access for critical key applications, they still have a tether into your system. And even though they're not professional hackers, that data that's in your system is worth money to someone that is on the dark web. So that's reality. That is one contributor to cyber threat activity being up. Another is more benign, is the remote worker scenario. Most all organizations are operating in a remote capacity. Staff members have been asked to work from home. Many organizations weren't prepared for this, a rapid shift of having people go home and work. So because of that, processes were done knee-jerk. There was no real formal process on how to do this securely. In many cases, they didn't have enough laptops to send people home with, so they just told people to use personal devices, which is a terrible idea. If you have teenagers that are using machines going to social media sites, etc., that those are susceptible to getting infected. So think about taking that same machine and taking it to the office and plugging it in. What kind of risk that introduces to your business? So and that's happening. And then lack of documentation or a real strong business contingency plan, coupled with the urgency to move forward and keep the business going, has created these vulnerabilities. Another thing,
Bill, if I may,
please.
An example. I know my wife's clinic, a lot of the large insurance providers have been paying for remote visits that have the capabilities of doing having webcam visits the same as if it was an in-person visit, due to the kind of remote work from home we find ourselves in right now. And I know in the first couple weeks after that change, the clinic was saying, yeah, everybody turn on, get your camera out and start doing start doing remote visits. But oftentimes the embedded app in Epic, for example, wasn't exactly the easiest for them to figure out. So what do? They FaceTime, they use Zoom, they use Google Hangouts, whatever they could, which is exposing their personal information to their patients and vice versa. So this remote work, while it doesn't, nothing inherently is bad, it lets us bring so many unknown variables into the workplace that mistakes get made.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an old saying, right? No good deed goes unpunished, right? So, the intent of providing healthcare and during a situation like this is being taken advantage of. Reduce staff. Many healthcare organizations, many organizations in general, have an internal IT team. Some of them have been reduced due to furloughing, and what that has done is impaired delays in detection and response to abnormalities within the system, cyber related. And then, if you are one of those SMB companies that relies on a IT service provider to service you, a lot of these IT companies that are smaller in size typically are more lifestyle type businesses, and they are struggling right now financially because of the nature in which they operate, and they're having to reduce staff, or some of them are even closing their doors. And if you're in a situation like that, where one day your IT is there and then the next day they're not, that also is creating some significant risk for you. And then finally, the piece that is most overlooked the most is the loss of sensitivity of working outside of the office. When you're in the office, there's a different mentality, a different culture in the office, and how you handle personal healthcare information, versus being at home. It's much more lax in that sense, and you're not in a cube. You're using a personal machine or a laptop, so there's that potential to become a little less focused on how you're handling personal health information. And then the effects of reduced staff are obviously adding additional work to those doing the work, and when they're being overburdened with work, there's potential for unplanned carelessness, just because they're so swamped that it's difficult to cross the T's and dot the I's from a cyber aware perspective. So what are the key technologies that you should have in your mix? We've already heard about how important Huntress is as an advanced threat detection, and it really is. It's a section of the security stack that is very unique and does a very specific job. But what are the other things that you should have in your environment? Obviously, AV is still important, though it's been around for a long time. It's a fundamental software that has to be in your environment. OS patching. Can't say enough about this. If you're running Windows, Microsoft Windows, you need to be doing patching. So again, make sure your patching is happening pretty consistently and following a process. Third-party access. If you've got vendors or other businesses, entities that are connecting into your environment where you're sharing data, first off, make sure you have a BAA agreement with them. Make sure that there is some accountability there. Because at the end of the day, I'll tell you, at the end of the day, anyone on this call might be thinking, well, my IT service provider is responsible for this. They've got this. I'm holding them accountable. You cannot outsource accountability. At the end of the day, they're going to do what they do, but the decisions to ensure that you have all the right tools in place really fall into decision makers' hands of that organization. So you cannot outsource accountability. Make sure that if anyone third party is connecting into your business, that they're doing it the right way. Offsite protection, that is really your system backups. Make sure you're doing them in a fashion that does not create a problem for you down the road. Let me explain that. A lot of businesses replicate. They will take whatever they're running on their server in one location and they replicate it to another location, and they believe that's the best way to do it. That's kind of an old school mentality. The reality is that's very dangerous, because if you download malware on your primary system and it's replicated off-site, you now have a replicated site of an infected system. It does you no good. So make sure that whatever off-site method you're using is one that will contribute to success in the event of a breach versus one that compounds it. WCF is web content filtering, very important. This part of the stack, beyond just controlling what websites end users get to, also will prevent inadvertent access to nefarious websites. When you heard Jeremy talk earlier about clicking on a link that downloads code, a good web content filtering solution will block that from happening. Again, it's that layered approach, or that net that you're trying to make smaller and smaller holes. This is another component of that stack that should be there to prevent that type of incident from occurring. Mail scanning. Everyone on this call should be using some sort of mail scanning solution that is scanning for viruses, scanning for attachments. It should also have some sort of built-in secure messaging component. So if you're going to have to send any type of PHI or any type of proprietary information, it needs to be encrypted between you and an outside party. You should be able to do that through your mail scanning solution. System backups, I spoke about that. Make sure your system backups are appropriate. And then finally, dark web monitoring. Having some sort of dark web monitoring solution is key, because if your data is put on the dark web and you have a dark web monitoring solution, you will be alerted that that is occurring. So it gives you an opportunity to get ahead of that problem before anything happens, and to report that to the appropriate authorities. So beyond technology, what can I do? We're wrapping up here. Okay, so beyond technology, what are the things that you can focus on? Again, the purpose of today is you should be taking back some ideas you can put in play today on your own that will reduce your risk of exposure. So HIPAA business security policies, are they COVID-19 ready? They were probably good before, but are they COVID-19 ready? So we would recommend that, revisit your risk assessment. Everyone on this call should be doing some sort of risk assessment. Some are HIPAA, some are just business in general risk assessments. Make sure they're up to date. Make sure that they are meeting the demands of some of the things that Jeremy and I have spoken about today on this call. Revisit your employee offboarding policies. Everyone has an HR offboarding policy, but there should be a technical offboarding policy that does things like remove remote access, remove the Active Directory credentials, or disable the Active Directory credentials. Make sure that their email is forwarded to the appropriate person internally. Make sure that any applications they were using, that they've been disabled, those sort of things. You want to make sure that there's no way they can get back into your environment once they're released. Your remote access and BYOD, bring your own device policies, should be reviewed. Those are basically acceptable usage policies. Make sure that they are up to date. Make sure that nobody is using, if you can at all afford it, possible, that no one is using a personal machine to connect to your environment from home. A lot of people think that, we're connected with a VPN, that should be good. Well, it's not. All the VPN has done is securely connect a personal owned machine to your environment. It's the equivalent of bringing your laptop from home and plugging it into your office network. Jeremy mentioned earlier about telemedicine. Make sure if you're using a telemedicine solution that it is HIPAA compliant. I know HHS has softened up some of the vocabulary there as far as being compliant, but we feel that even beyond this incident, there will be there's opportunities that are happening in the cyber threat world that, even though you're not HIPAA compliant, that your practice could be at risk. So make sure it's HIPAA compliant and that you have a BAA signed with that vendor that's providing that service. And then finally, having a cyber aware culture. You know, there are software solutions out there that we advocate for that will provide cyber training to your end users monthly, very short, very important, impactful cyber videos, training videos that are typically 5 minutes long with a quiz at the end. That way the end user has seen the video, they've taken a little quiz. That's introducing more of a culture of being cyber aware, especially while they're working remote. And quarterly phishing simulations, being able to simulate do a phishing exercise each quarter where the end users are receiving an email to test their behaviors. The idea is to reinforce and measure the new behaviors they're developing from the cyber training. That's a lot. I know we said a lot today. Jeremy has been very informative. Hopefully the information I've shared with you can take back to your organization and put in play now. But what's next, right? What's next is, again, part of our forward movement initiative is to give back to our community, to our clients, to our market. And so we are extending to any of the attendees a complimentary cyber security baseline assessment and dark web scan. So the idea there is we'll come in, we'll sit with you, we'll get an idea, work with you to determine what your security stack looks like, what your posture looks like from a security standpoint. We'll run a dark web scan on your domain and let you know if there's there's been any hits there that we can share with you, and we'll go from there. But the idea is for us to deliver this to you as something impactful to make sure that the challenges you're dealing with COVID are not complicated by all of this other cyber threat activity. That's it. I appreciate everyone's time. Megan, would you like to wrap up? Or did you get any questions, Megan? I should ask first.
At this time, there are no questions. If anyone does have a question, please feel free to submit it through the chat and we can address it now. I do want to take some time to thank you, Bill, and also Jeremy for sharing this wisdom and knowledge. We will have this recording available to everyone who registered for the webinar. You can refer to it later or distribute it to your key personnel to make sure everyone is just as informed as you are. We do encourage you to reach out after the webinar if you have any questions about anything that was discussed. We're happy to initiate a conversation, go deeper into any points that might have been murky. We will be also extending an opportunity to answer a survey about the webinar. We are always trying to be as educational as possible. We want to make sure we're giving you the information that you need at the time that you need it. Please feel free to submit suggestions or topics that you would like for us to address, whether it's personally or on a webinar.
Thanks, guys. And final thought from me, not all IT providers are created equal, and IT and IT security aren't the same thing. So make sure that you are working with somebody that cares more or as much or more about your security and their security as they do about the IT portion. Because if you're not a security first company or not a security first IT provider, we're moving into a time where you're just not going to be able to survive in the long term. I know Strategic, as you've seen today, cares about this stuff tremendously, and that's the type of partners that we look for when we're going to market.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate that.
So if you'd like to take advantage of the Forward Movement initiative, including the cybersecurity baseline assessment, dark web scan, please feel free to email bill.lopez@ssva.com. We're happy to follow up with you there. I think that about wraps it up. Thank you everyone for your time. I'll be looking forward to our next webinar.
Have a great holiday weekend.